Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we are doing a Star Wars tier list. Now, I know this has nothing to do with what I usually do on the channel, that being Lego Star Wars, but I do appreciate the Star Wars movies a lot. I think they're really enjoyable and I love them, of course. So today I thought I would be sharing my opinions on where they stand in a tier list. If you've never seen a tier list before, it basically looks like this, with S at the top, which means it's the very, very best, and then at the bottom we have F tier, which means it's the worst of the worst. And then in between we of course have, in between. You get the idea. This is going to be Star Wars movies and shows. I know some people like to do them separately, but I'm going to do them together, and I'm going to split them into parts. So I'm going to do the main 9 movies in this video, the Skywalker saga, and then I'm going to do the shows and other movies in part 2. And this does not include the Star Wars vintage shows like 2002 Clone Wars or Ewoks, none of those, or the Star Wars Holiday Special. So if you're looking to see those, which I doubt anybody was, you're not getting them. And to start off, we have the Phantom Menace, Episode 1. This movie came out in 1999 and was our first prequel trilogy movie. I personally think this movie doesn't get enough credit. Yes, people are going to say that this movie is relatively slow and probably one of the worst Star Wars movies. And yes, I agree with it being kind of slow. It's kind of hard to know what's going on sometimes because the dialogue is a bit quiet or there's not a lot of action going on at the beginning. And of course, you gotta sit there and watch Jar Jar goof around for most of the movie. But when you get past all that, it's a really good movie. There are so many technological and just so many feats for Star Wars in this movie that I don't think get enough credit. Like, we got to see so many new species like Watto and Sebulba. Lots of different stuff on Tatooine like that. We got to see battle droids for the first time. We got to see the Jedi while they were in mass. We got to see Anakin Skywalker's backstory, along with a bunch of other cool characters like Qui-Gon Jinn, and just so many cool things in this movie that just get overlooked so much, and I think it goes higher in the ranking than it does on most people's lists. And this is, of course, my opinion, so I think I'm going to put it into the C tier. It's not a stellar movie at all. It's not S tier worthy, but it's not a bad movie either, so I'm going to put it right in the middle there. Next is Attack of the Clones. This movie released in 2002 and was the next movie in the prequel trilogy. This movie also had a lot of technical feats, especially in the CGI with the clone troopers, some updates on the battle droids, and just so many really cool things, but the beginning is very, very slow. We get those air quote love scenes between Anakin and Padme, which are just so cringy. George Lucas is not a romance writer at all. It has a very slow plot line the first hour and a half, but the very end is absolutely phenomenal. We get to see the Jedi fighting in the arena against all the battle droids and stuff, which is super cool. And then we get them fighting another battle out on the surface of Geonosis with all the clones and battle droids. There's a part where the smoke on the battlefield just clears, and then the clones come out of the smoke, mowing the droids down with their blasters. It is so cool. And then after that battle, we get a duel between Anakin and Obi-Wan against Count Dooku, and then they fail, obviously. And then Yoda comes in, pulls out his green lightsaber, never seen that before, may I add, and then he does all these flips and stuff on Count Dooku and fights him. And it's such a cool ending to the movie, but it's put down by that odd beginning part of the movie. I think I'm going to put it in B tier, and the reason for that being, although we do have these awkward romance scenes, the camera will cut away to Obi-Wan hunting down Jango Fett on Kamino, through space, on Geonosis, and these kind of interesting scenes throughout the movie that just provide a break from that awkwardness. Okay, so I'm editing this video, and I just realized that I accidentally put Attack of the Clones in C tier right next to the Phantom Menace for the next couple of minutes. So when you see it there, just know it's supposed to be in B tier. This is later corrected. It's just a mistake on my part, but please just know it's in B tier and not C tier, okay? Lastly is The Revenge of the Sith. This was the third movie in the prequel trilogy and released in 2005. This movie was another crazy technical feat in CGI with more updates to the clones and more updates to the battle droids. Like, the last sequence in this movie with the clones, all CGI. There's not one clone in there that's like an actor in a clone costume or anything. It's all CGI. And that's so crazy to think about for an early 2000s movie. absolutely phenomenal. Like that entire battle on Kashyyyk, the only things that aren't CGI are the Wookiees. The rest is completely computer generated. This movie has so many cool scenes otherwise, like Yoda and Palpatine's duel, Anakin and Obi-Wan's duel, one of my favorite scenes ever. Those two guys are so fast with their lightsabers, so quick and so cool. I could talk about this movie for an hour if I wanted to, but I'm trying to keep this video to a reasonable time, so I'm gonna just say that it's a great movie and put it in S tier, and let's move on. Next up is the very first original trilogy movie, A New Hope. You can't go wrong with an OG movie like this. It's a fun movie to watch. Very entertaining. I mean, even from the start, we get Luke on Tatooine, and then we get him going into space with Han Solo, and then fighting these big baddies in their Death Star, and then blowing it up at the end. Every part about it is just so likable and just a lot of nostalgia for everybody, no matter the age. However, I don't think this movie is quite S tier worthy. I think it belongs in the A tier, and I think that's where it's going to stay for now. The reason, it's not perfect. There are, of course, those small filmmaking flaws that were inevitable for the 70s. This movie came out in 1977, but it's still a great movie. Just blew everyone away when it first came out, and I still go crazy over the trench run to this day. One of my favorite Star Wars movies. A tier for sure. The Empire Strikes Back. This is where my list gets controversial. Just go ahead and say, I don't not like this movie. The Empire Strikes Back is great. I mean, the Battle of Hoth with the AT-ATs, that was just like, the AT-ATs were stop motion. That's to my core. That's literally what I do on the channel. That is like straight to me. That is, and it's such a cool scene. Like the rebels fighting with their snowspeeders. They know they're outnumbered, but they're still going to fight, and that's really, really cool. Then throughout the rest of the movie, we see the Millennium Falcon struggle to evade the Empire, and you know, I like seeing that struggle. Like, the good guys don't always win. I mean, sometimes they're gonna, struggle through it. They're not always, have the plot armor and stuff. And then the end scene with Darth Vader telling Luke he's his father not only adds depth to Luke Skywalker, because now he's fighting his dad, the big bad guy, but it adds depth to Darth Vader's character, because now he's no longer this cartoony character in every movie. He has depth to him. He has a story, so you can connect with him more on a weird level. But Star Wars was like that first movie to introduce family ties between good and evil. Like, I'm your father. Star Wars was one of the first movies to do that. But because of that, the whole I am your father line has become such a gag in movie media that it's not even like a crazy thing anymore. That's the main reason why people like this movie so much, is because when they were growing up, the reveal of Darth Vader as Luke's father was like crazy. It was mind-blowing. No one had ever thought of that before. George Lucas was an absolute genius, but now, watching it today, I didn't grow up during the 80s. I didn't know what that was like, and I can't, no matter how hard I try, I can't seem to find that connection, that awe, and just, the family relations thing, because it's become such a joke. I think it's a great movie, but I also think it's not the best of the best, like most people think. I don't think it's the greatest Star Wars movie ever. So therefore, I'm going to be putting it in A tier, which might not be too controversial, but most people think it belongs in S tier, and I do not think it does at all. Okay, so after that spew, which was one take, by the way, I'm shocked I didn't have to do a second take of that, we're going to move to Return of the Jedi. This movie came out in 1983, I believe, and was the third movie in the original trilogy. This is a great movie for me. You can't get much better an ending than this. This provides such a good resolve to Star Wars that we didn't need a sequel trilogy, and yes, of course, Disney gave us one that we didn't want, but looking past the sequels, The Return of the Jedi is a great ending to just a series. We got Han Solo on Endor with Leia and Luke, and then Luke goes up to fight his father on the Death Star. Then we got Lando trying to destroy the Death Star, and then we got the Death Star trying to destroy the Rebel fleet, and it's just kind of all over the place near the end, but it somehow comes together in this great finale. In the beginning, I like to talk about the end of the movies because that's always the highlight for me, but at the beginning, it shows that there are other like big crime guys in the galaxy that you need to take care of other than the Empire. You need to save your friend instead of going to fight the big bad guys. And then that whole scene is just really cool. Jabba's sail barge and the Sarlacc pit. I don't know what it is about this movie. I just think it left a bigger impact on me than the other two original trilogy movies. It encapsulated the series. It provided that perfect ending to a perfect trilogy, and for that reason, I think it belongs in the S tier. Moving on to the final three main trilogy movies. Oh boy, here we go. Starting off with The Force Awakens. This movie released in 2017 and was the first movie in the sequel trilogy. I think this movie gets put down by the other two sequel movies. I like this movie, not as much as the original movies, but this one had everything that Star Wars was. It had action and stormtroopers and star battles and stuff like that. But, and when it first came out, everybody was so excited. Like, we got a Star Wars movie for the first time in 10 years, and that's just so awesome. It made Star Wars fun again, and I think a lot of character arcs were introduced in this movie, and I feel like they needed to arc a little bit more in the next two movies, and then, of course, they didn't. That being said, this movie deserves a lot more credit than it gets, so I think it belongs in the D tier. It's not at all better than The Phantom Menace or Attack of the Clones, but saying that, it's not a bad movie either, so we're just going to leave it in D tier. Next is The Last Jedi. Oh boy, this movie was a dumpster fire. We got no continuation of the story. I didn't feel like this movie added anything to the sequel trilogy. I mean, we got to see Luke Skywalker at the end of Force Awakens, only to find out in this movie he's a complete grouch, and he's just a jerk and a recluse, and just not the Luke Skywalker we remembered. Now he's just weird. I mean, the hyperspace ram, come on. Like, if you watch that, they ram a small transport into a dreadnought and it shatters the entire fleet. That's not how hyperspace works. That's not how Star Wars works in general. It felt like Disney didn't know what they were doing and got really confused at this part in the saga. The story didn't feel like it was advancing in any way with this movie. It didn't feel like there was much world building or story building or character building or any kind of building, because this movie was just so despicable. It felt like a weird side quest that the characters had to go on that didn't provide anything to the main story. When we go to the next movie, there's no defeat anymore. Like in this movie, the Resistance gets defeated by the First Order, and now they're down to a dozen people. That did not transfer over to the next movie in any way. It just felt like a complete waste of time. As a Star Wars movie, it's absolute garbage in my opinion, but as a standalone movie, I think it would be okay, so I'm going to put it in E tier. The Rise of Skywalker. One way to put this movie is a complete mess. That is a very accurate description of this movie. I feel like Disney went and just said, hey, this is the last movie, let's just throw everything in here. We got the original main trilogy cast of the good guys here, let's throw in Palpatine, and hey, he's got this big massive fleet for some reason that he built in a matter of 10 years, and Finn, him, the guy who was a stormtrooper who turned good, we're throwing him in the garbage. He doesn't do anything in this movie at all. And Kylo Ren, he dies, we don't care about him. We got all these ships coming in to fight, and half of them don't have guns, but who cares? We're just gonna do everything all at once in this movie. Wow. This movie didn't have the resolve I was looking for, whereas Return of the Jedi kind of had that full circle resolve. The Empire's defeated, all is good, hooray. This movie had that, yes, but less so. It felt like a complete rushed mess. Lots of random stuff in here, somehow Palpatine returned. That's ridiculous. What is happening? This movie is fun to watch, yes, but it's also very confusing. A lot of it is elaborated more with shows like The Mandalorian or The Bad Batch. And when you don't watch those shows, this movie is just really, really confusing on a lot of different levels. So therefore, it's going in the E tier right next to The Last Jedi. So, this concludes part 1 of me ranking all of Star Wars. Part 2 will be coming out very soon, in that I will be ranking all of these Star Wars animated shows, like Clone Wars, Rebels. I will also be ranking the other 3 Star Wars movies, and that would be Solo, Rogue One, and the Clone Wars. And then in part 3, yes, I'm making a part 3, I will rank all the live-action Star Wars shows, so Book of Boba Fett, The Mandalorian, and The Acolyte. unfortunately. So be sure to stay tuned in for that. And one way you can stay tuned in is by subscribing. So why don't you go ahead and scroll down a little bit and hit the subscribe button, you know? It helps me out and it helps you out. So I guess that's it for now anyways. But thank you, and I'll see you next time.